Well, good to see you, and thank you so much for your time that you have allocated us. It's really, we know how busy you are, and we're very grateful for you for the time. And as you know, the plan is that we have on the front cover the statue of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. And first of all, I'd like to hear your opinion or your take on the goddess of wisdom, Sophia.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this invitation. And also, I really see it as like that we co-create maybe some new insights, further insights on that special issue and on the archetype of wisdom. I would not so much put it into like, a female deity, a female goddess Sophia, but really would say like the wisdom archetype in a masculine and a feminine form. Yeah. And that is inside all of us. That would come very much from a analytical archetypal psychology of Jung, which is also, I think, a basis, of the work. And also, I always like to connect it beyond also, let's say, modern world, psychological, therapeutic oriented definitions and foundations. Of course, we find the wisdom archetype in all world religions, in all cultures, in all indigenous shamanic traditions. You can find, for example, I'm acquainted with native Indian tradition, especially also kind of West African traditions, of course, pagan traditions of Europe. So there would be certain animal spirits that represent the wisdom archetype. That would be, for example, the crow or the raven as an archetype of wisdom. Always it's connected to be able to be a messenger between worlds, between different dimensions. It's always connected also to a certain level of magic, let's say good magic, white magic of being able to transcend certain limitations. There would be other spirit animals that would be associated also. That would be, for example, the turtle, also very much associated like one of the oldest animals on earth, the wisdom keeper, the wisdom keeper of all knowledge, of all history, of all traditions. So I would rather call in this quality of, let's call in the wisdom from all directions. From all traditions, world religion, psychology, philosophy, anthropology, indigenous cultures, and have a rather integrative, eclectic stance to the wisdom archetype. And then much later, of course, comes the goddess Sophia, or the wisdom archetype, of course, also of the divine feminine. We can give it a certain feminine quality. In that sense, it focus, which will be I think probably a topic throughout this talk discussion. A wisdom for relationship, a wisdom for connecting inside, wisdom for connecting with everything around me, with the world in large, from a place of, I would say, ethics, the ethics of the heart, to act in integrity, to talk in integrity, to synthesize knowledge with integrity. That would be the ethics of the heart. Then often also there's associated the quality of intuition, which is usually very much intertwined with a divine feminine quality. So there's a certain connotation of a divine feminine quality of relationship, of ethical integrity of the heart, and of an intuition, which also can lead into being able, to be a messenger between the worlds. Or Sophia, the pictures of Sophia, with the wheel, being able to see through the wheel. So this is rather, I would use it rather as metaphorical understanding, but I would as much also emphasize the importance of the wisdom archetype of a masculine quality. I would say that would be really like, like the ruler, the leader, the king that has developed the heart, um, the leader that has developed the integrity, and the leader that has developed the maturity to come into union with the feminine in a mature way. So it's like, yeah, and that would be the dance, of course, from Ziggy Jung, it would be anima and animus, it would be the constant dance of a development, yeah, until we die, of anima and animus, including our shadow aspects and including tapping into the unconscious, collective unconscious, to retrieve ancient knowledge and to expand our state of being, I would say.
Yeah, one candidate for the title of this piece would be the ancient wisdom and the modern science, and that would also provide, I think, a structure for this conversation. Could you please elaborate on your what experiences you've had in the tribal cultures? You mentioned Western Africa, you mentioned South Africa, South America, and other places. What have been the major lessons that you've gathered from these before we start to before we switch to the modern science part of it?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's part of my nature. It's part of my being in this life. Since I'm 14, I'm traveling the world. Yeah, so whole Europe, African continents, and so forth until today. So it's like I'm a little bit like a nomad or a gypsy on one level. Just like with 14, I had this idea I want to travel the world with my backpack, and I did. And rather like a researcher already, with 14 years, like, wow, I want to study culture, I want to expand my horizon, I want to learn through differences. Also, a very important experience very early in life then was to be a minority, not to be speaking in my comfort zone, my own language. So with 14, I traveled the world speaking English and traveling many different countries, which I do until today. So that's like, I would say the anthropologist in me, my anthropological heart, drives me into leaving the comfort zone, wanting to learn through others, taking the effort of being a minority, taking the effort of really trying to understand. And of course, then on the way, I was spiritual. I had deep mystical experiences since I'm a child and teenager. So all my life since teenagehood, I study anthropology, spiritual tradition, mysticism of Europe, etc. In my 20s, I traveled to India. I traveled whole India, studying the different world religions. Wanted to become a Buddhist nun, just to dedicate my life to all these studies and this kind of life and this immersion. And then and so forth, and then I studied, yes, modern scientific approaches, psychology. But then in 2004, I just need to really mention that to understand the intensity. I survived a tsunami in Thailand, the Asian tsunami in Thailand, had a full-blown near-death experience. Was like a miracle was thrown back onto land, and have like a second life now in this life. And the calling was then that I have to be a scholar, not only for modern sciences, but also for spirituality and the ancient wisdom, which I anyways was totally interested. Yeah. And so it became like a task of the second part after the tsunami of my life to be a scholar really for both. Went then to the US. I was already clinical psychologist. I'm an emergency nurse in my first training, and then I did a PhD in transpersonal psychology, specializing in studying shamanic traditions. Here comes also in the psychedelic, studying psychedelic science, plant medicine, indigenous approaches, and combining it, intertwining it with modern therapeutic approaches of psychology and medicine. So that's kind of as such a strong drive in my force. I would say that's how Sophia comes through me to me, yeah, through my life experiences, through my lived through experiences, through the way like nature gave me such a strong interest and such a strong force in this kind of way of studying. So what I understood also in the tsunami, after I survived the tsunami, I was standing there in the devastation of millions of people died, everything destroyed around me. I was standing there with this one thought: what should I do now with one-on-one psychotherapy here? That would not really work. Yeah, that would not really help. Yeah, and people even would not seek it. Of course, that it's a different culture, different background. And of course, that was not a new thought. Yeah, but suddenly I really experienced what it means when standing in the middle of a devastation. What should we do with this over individualized psychotherapeutic approach of modern times, of modern psychology? So that was like a big lesson, like wash, like and not new. And I was kind of seeking this knowledge, but then really the answer was, yeah, it has to be integrated. The modern life in over individuation went over the top. It went so much into unbalance that we lost the natural connection with nature, which means with our human nature. Yeah. And that refers very much to the work of Segi Jung again. Yeah, this book that Sabini wrote, she's a female Jung scholar from the US. She wrote that book, The Earth Has a Soul. And for me, this is a manifesto. I mean, in 1920s, Segi Jung diagnosed the modern world as a dissociative disorder, meaning we are completely disconnected from the human nature, from nature. That's why we over individualized. That's why we exploit everything. That's why there's so much imbalance and disharmony in the world. And his thesis in the 1920s was, we need to cut down on technology. We get completely lost when we spend so much time in technologies. And we need nature as our teacher. We need to spend so much more time in nature, which he did, which he really did. And this is the bridge to ancient wisdom. So coming back to your question, this is kind of a bridge from Jung to indigenous knowledge, but of course not only Jung, to say, okay, all indigenous cultures will say there's only one teacher, or there are two teachers: our experiences of life and nature. Nature teaches us everything, the cycles of nature, everything that is inhabiting nature. And of course, indigenous traditions see everything as inspirited. Yeah. Everything has a spirit: animal, plants, the cycles of nature give signs how we need to align, we need to come in harmony. And Segi Jung very much promoted exactly this vision. Yeah. Of course, then others will come, Mirsha Eliade, etc. Yeah, and many more Western scholars will tap into that, and that feels like really this by nature. I'm giving this. My calling in this life is to really clearly demonstrate the bridge is anyways there. We don't need to invent the bridge. It's only that we really fully surrender and commit to bridging the old knowledge, bridging the living with nature, living in harmony, and not exploiting all the things that we did, yeah, that led to our world crisis that we are now in. And to still, of course, then we have the advancement of modern science, and then we have the advancement of technologies, and the specialization of things. But it's not either or, it's as if, we need both, and we need to integrate it in a new way, in a new balance, in a new harmony, what often is called a new renaissance. We need a new renaissance that also includes the psychedelic renaissance, the third wave of the psychedelic renaissance. We need to create a new harmony in connection with everything. And still we move on in modern scientific and technological advances.
You worked also as a nurse in oncology wards. How has that experience shaped your outlook on your current work and on the life in general?
I mean, it was already, I lost my mother very early in life from cancer, and then I worked in oncology as an emergency nurse. So it was kind of, I think, integrating partially my own experience very, very early in life. But then also I felt I really have something to give, like accompanying dying patients, accompanying families with dying patients. So death and near death is like a red thread in my life that I feel I was called to integrate in a very deep level, and that I feel I have really integrated well, especially after the tsunami. I mean, the tsunami, this whole experience took me 10, 15 years of therapy, of integration work, after that I could speak in the way I speak now. Yeah. So that's like life and death is like a calling in my life on a very, very deep, comprehensive level of modern individualization and collective ancient indigenous knowledge.
I'd like read a sentence from your writing on the Meredith Sabini's book and ask you to comment on that if you. Sabini emphasizes that since the birth of Judeo-Christian reductionism, our disconnection with nature is not practical or psychological problem, but a religious one. Hence, any true cure for our cultural neurosis, our dissociation from nature, would have to awaken both our spirit and our nature to a new life. Could you please comment on that one?
That's exactly what I already said, like what Jung said, like we need to spend extended times in nature. For example, interestingly, also Albert Hofmann, the inventor of LSD, said exactly the same, both sitting in Switzerland, the one in Zurich, the one in Basel. Yeah, so like there was a field also in that time frame to really understand that. And of course, not only those two, but like they are really relevant for how I was able to understand modern and ancient approaches. Jung articulated more clearly, but also Albert Hofmann so much talked about we need to spend time in nature. Through nature, we recuperate all that is there already on our DNA. I mean, all the ancient knowledge, basically epigenetic research shows all the knowledge is on our DNA. To some extent, we can access it. And then the question is, okay, what do we remember? What do we not remember? And so far at the moment, the scientific explanation is based on our experience, things will get activated. So imagine like this huge DNA, like a hard drive, and there's so much information sleeping. Then through our life experiences, either challenging or either beautiful, we start remembering information and knowledge. Yeah. And the bridge is really nature. And I mean, I studying in depth native Indian traditions. And this is just one example. Yeah. So, but like living with always with the balance. So basically, what is the major, I would say, the major message of the indigenous traditions is we need to seek harmony and balance inside us, around us, in the tribe, in the nature. And what we did in modern time, we just exploit everything, or we go into extremes. Yeah. That means on all levels. So in a shamanic education, let's say, yeah, it means like that we need to develop all aspects, which links very well to Jung. We need to develop all our archetypes in a strong way and balance them to become as whole as possible. And in that way, also from that place, develop the ethics of the heart, and then be able to really care for all relations and to care for nature.
Anything from your side? You've been silent.
Yeah, I'm listening. I am a question regarding what is the way further
out of the neurosis.
Yeah, I've talked a lot with young people, with youth, and I was really surprised at how broken they are. At least I understood that the group of young people, every second is suffering anxiety or depression or anorexia or something like that. And they all have visiting psychotherapists, and some of them have also got this medicine, this synthetic medicine, antidepressant. And if I think that synthetic medicine and mechanic way of healing, by my mind, is not kind of, it can't touch the whole thing, the whole human being. And my question is that how do you see the way out from here?
I mean, first of all, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in psychiatry 25 years. So there, of course, is very complex question and complex answer. I always also promote psychiatry and medicine on that level. First of all, always to support and save life. And of course, we see much suffering in psychiatry. And also, like not to become missionary, to say like, we know how it needs to be and you are wrong and we are right. So I don't go into this splitting. I would say I'm really always eclectic and integrative. To some extent, I promote mainstream medicine and clinical psychology. They have their impact and they have their value. And it always depends on, of course, who is curable or who can be really, experience transmission. That's a different discussion. But it really depends also on what is the person really seeking, And let's say if there are people who are seeking further or who are having a specific also, for example, spiritual search, or like interested or open to shamanic approaches, then I would say there should be also the possibility that such people can also experience a different or wider framework. And basically I'm kind of a ambassador for both, and I'm ambassador to take care of that we can build bridges that are really good and healthy and professional, to bridge both, the modern approaches and the shamanic or rather old knowledge. And there's no right or wrong, and every experience is individual. Who benefits from this, who benefits from this we only know in the process. So I always, the most important thing that I always say is like, it needs to resonate with the person, and not to become missionary or something about whatever route we want to take.
Okay.
I'd like to ask you about the phrase embodied phenomenology. I only learned about the word phenomenology like, I don't know, 5 years ago. And I think it has been really, when I look at my path over the last 10 years, that perhaps was one of the most significant turning points for me, understanding what the phenomenology means. And I think it could also be for our interesting also for our readers, and particularly what does embodied phenomenology mean?
Yeah, for me it is also, I would not claim that I can now explain what phenomenology means, but it's more like naturally coming out of my curiosity of studying. It was all my life I experienced as a phenomenology, seeing so many layers, understanding, seeing so many layers, seeking answers for so many more dimensions. So by nature, it's a qualitative approach. It's more like a explorative research. I want to know, like a library, I want to know the many layers of this experience, or the many layers of that knowledge what I just read in that article or that book. So that's just naturally there. I feel that's a little bit like a gift also, understanding in a phenomenological way. But however, I'm not so much, I'm not really a theorist. I'm
Mhm.
much more, I understand through experience. I understand through my body. That's another gift. And of course, that would be more, I would say, also female, probably not limited to that, but a female approach to phenomenology through the body, through creativity, through intuition. And embodied phenomenology is developed by Les Todres. He was my supervisor in my doctoral dissertation in the part that I did in the UK. And so it's basically the work on Eugene Sandlin, experiential phenomenology. It's of course based on Husserl, it's based on Heidegger, Gadamer, and then that Eugene Sandlin gave this embodiment emphasis to it, because all our lived experiences are in our body. All our lived experiences are going through our body. Our body is like a library. That's what I understood when I was in kindergarten. Yeah. And I would say Eugene Sandlin is a key for that understanding. He developed then the therapy method focusing, but on a research level, theory level, he's a very strong theoretical scholar. He studied all the, like historic phenomenologists, and he was the first one to really bring in this strong emphasis on experience and develop then the focusing method. So that's kind of a bridge that my supervisor of my doctorate, Les Todres, developed. And what is unique in his approach, Les Todres' approach, embodied inquiry, that at least he gives space. There's also spiritual experience, or there can be a spiritual dimension, there can be a spiritual experience. In that way, it's kind of intertwining body, mind, spirit on the one level inside, and then outside the community and nature. And then there would be also, of course, the transgenerational approach, epigenetic research, acknowledging our information on our DNA. And that would bridge also to my trauma expertise, trauma work, to say like our story does not start here now. We take this on from our ancestors. Yeah.
Right. But you mentioned, I think, if I heard you correctly, that there is a third wave of psychedelic renaissance now. How would you, what were the first two, and how does a third differ from the first two?
Yeah, very much so. Just briefly, very briefly, the 60s would be like a starting point of the first wave. Yeah. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the power flower, revolution time in the US, in Europe, in a different way. Yeah. So that would be like suddenly everything is possible, breaking conventions. Yeah, breaking, of course, also after war times more present in Europe than in the US. Yeah, but breaking convention, completely going to new levels of life and relationships. Yeah, and then experimenting with all kinds of drugs. I mean, that was like plant medicine was possible, but also then there was this time of developing chemical drugs, modern substances, LSD, of course. MDMA was much earlier developed, but then also took the ride. But I would say the 60s was really like mescaline based on previous experiences. And then LSD coming as a modern substance, and having this like Woodstock experiences, things like that. Yeah, but also then in the 60s there was a period where it was legal. So in psychiatry medicine, they did research, they did legal therapy quite strongly in Europe as much as in the US. And then after a certain period in the 70s, when it went, of course, in a kind of hedonistic way, it went over the top. Yeah, all these celebrations. Yeah, and then it started to make the drugs illegal. Yeah. And then all the research, all the therapy was prohibited, which was, of course, from a scientific perspective, was like a huge breakdown. Yeah. and then yeah, small things going back and forth. Yeah, if I speak now also for Europe, I mean in Europe also, especially I come from Germany. There was in the University of Göttingen was a strong research center for psychedelic therapy and psychedelic research. They still were able to continue to some extent. They worked with, for example, psilocybin even then in the 70s and 80s. But yeah, and then Switzerland, where is my other hub of teachers and trainings? Switzerland always had a specific status in Europe. Somehow they were always able to make specific possibilities to continue therapy and research. So there was always a different setting, but not on a large scale, only like little things here and there. And then the second psychedelic renaissance is kind of roughly described in the 80s, 90s, related to music, all the rave, all the techno, all the festivals suddenly coming up, which I love very much to cite because it's a cultural. So that was a cultural breakout again, as was the 60s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now came in the 80s, 90s as raves and techno festivals. Yeah? And for example, there, especially here in Europe, it was very strong. Also, UK kind of was breaking really conventions. So that made possible. That was a lot of MDMA. That was making possible, for example, all the the gay movement, LGBT, like same-sex marriages. That's all based on this second wave, rave techno, MDMA, big wave, yeah, of going to the street with love to say, okay, again, we are breaking conventions of mainstream society, and we are expanding consciousness and possibilities of living in society. Yeah? And then there was again another wave also of research and therapy. And that's also, for example, when MAPS started, the big organization from USA on MDMA research in the 80s. Yeah, that was in that second wave to say, hey, we need to utilize this also for healing and for transformation of the societies. Yeah. And then again, it was made illegal. Yeah. So again, therapy and research was totally shut down. And then again, little things here and there were made able, but not in a big scale of research, And then only now, then, like we can say maybe the last 10 years, roughly, we could say a third wave of a psychedelic renaissance developed, which is much more focusing on healing. So let's say the first and the second was more on a cultural breakthrough, also very much a hedonistic aspect to it. Let's just be wild and celebrate. Of course, also spiritual communities developed. But now the third wave, the last 10, now nearly 20 years, 15, 20 years, so much focus on healing. Yeah. So all these modern and plant medicines, different potential for healing. Yeah. And then suddenly much more research was again possible, not on a huge scale, but on a larger scale, and developing therapy manuals in accordance with research. And of course, leading is really MDMA research. This is what Rick Doblin from MAPS took on. It was also to some extent always present in Europe, especially Germany and Switzerland, for example, what I know, also UK, of course. And so I would say, like, yeah, these last 20, 30 years now paved the way that to show the amazing results with MDMA, especially for treatment of PTSD, which means more severe cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, with amazing groundbreaking results. So we can expect in the next 5 years, potentially, especially in US and then in Europe, a legal treatment with MDMA for PTSD. But we need to be clear, only from psychiatrists and only for really severe cases. So it's not like yeah, in 5 years everything will be nice and legal. So it's not like that. Yeah, so it's kind of a step by step process. Yeah, and the other substance pretty groundbreaking is psilocybin. A lot of research, I mean, since the 60s, a lot of really strong research on moderate treatment of depression, moderate treatment of addictions, moderate treatment of anxiety disorders, and kind of other things. Yeah, but in really, like, let's say a general population is suffering a lot from depression, anxiety, and addiction, and psilocybin is really good and strong here. So that's kind of the next substance that we can expect also in the next 5 to 8 years to be legalized for exactly this diagnosis. Yeah, treatment resistant depression, treatment resistant. So the people need to have tried any other modality that did not work enough, and then they will be allowed, for if they want to, for the treatment of such modalities in the hands of medicine, in the hands of psychiatrists. Yeah? And then only much later, probably then another 10 years or whatsoever, maybe for a more general population, it can be legalized, that those who seek it, and for those therapists who will be qualified, that they could do psychedelic assisted therapy for a more general population, but that will be still a long way. And then the third part is, of course, okay, what about relatively normal, healthy population? Still, everything will be illegal. So we need to really understand the framework, because what I see really in a general population, that it can be really misunderstood to a large extent. It's not like that in 5 years psychedelic therapy or psychedelic use will be legal. It's more like a step-by-step process, but only the most severe cases will be allowed to get treatment. So it's still a long way to integrate psychedelics also in a non-pathological way. And that's actually really my calling. Aside that I'm a clinician, aside that I'm a trauma expert, and that was kind of turning of my career to say I stand up for example, MDMA treatment for trauma. I stand up politically and ethically for that, because I saw so much suffering and not really much help. Yeah. Or then with psilocybin, okay, if this is so groundbreaking, I stand up for it as a clinician to say that needs to be possible. But so what about a relatively normal, healthy population? So this is all still totally illegal. I mean, for me, this really does not make sense. And here all my shamanic studies come into play. So here again, we come back to this original question, or let's say metaphor, of bridging ancient knowledge and modern science. I clearly have the assumption and the hypothesis that all this information of ancient knowledge is also stored in our body, in our DNA. To some extent, we can activate it also by the use of plant medicine, for example. Of course, depends on the culture, depends on settings, etc., etc. But the point that I want to make is, like, psychedelics are not here on earth only as a pharmacological or psychotherapeutic treatment. Psychedelics are here on earth as plant medicine many thousand years ago have been used. And my actually real interest is to make it available as a cultural intervention. In modern times, we are, let's say, we here in the modern world, we are not living in the Amazon. We are not in a lineage of 10 generations of shamans behind us. And still we carry to some extent that wisdom and knowledge. And still to some extent, I would say, we have a right for cultural wise and ethical use of plant medicine. And that's actually really part of my calling that comes out of the survival of the tsunami, where I would say, after such an experience, it feels absolutely nonsense to make such a limitation that only modern treatment would be available and legal, and the cultural knowledge of thousands of years would be illegal. I mean, yeah, no, it does not make sense. And having such a profound existential experience, even more so, it does not make sense.
Yeah, I was listening carefully, very carefully you, and you mentioned that today the healing is coming back, that the need of healing, and I started to think that there is also threat that if something is like waving up, it's getting hype, and there more healers are coming to the market, and between healer and healer there is a difference, and it's a threat that you everybody could mention themselves that okay, we are healer, that come here, I can heal you, that there will be kind of every people should very carefully look to whom they make some kind of orders, or whom they accept as a healers.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, but that's really always a topic that's with any doctor, with any therapist, with training or without training. First of all, of course, what is a professional work, what is the ethical work, and then on a more personal level, what does resonate with you, and with whom can you work well, and where do you feel safe, and where do you feel you get enhanced, yeah. And of course, there's really downside. That's kind of why I always promote both. I say like there needs to be enough professional background to know what we are doing, yeah. And then at the same time, I also promote, but not only limited to the realms of medicine and psychotherapy. So it's like, like it's exactly this twist. And how could we improve that? How would it be improved in ancient cultures? By the tribe, by living in the tribe, by living in a certain structures. So what we would need is, I mean, when Jung says we need to connect with nature and with communities, he emphasized that also. We need to, we need to live in bigger hubs than only our little families. We need to focus more on community building. So that would be the second aspect, as important as nature, to say, to develop really a new harmony and to develop healing on a larger scale would need a certain community around us. We cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it in isolation. And if we still stay in isolation, not so much will change. And let's say in a community where everybody has their place, and where community can regulate, the dynamics going on, then probably potentially it could create a certain more stronger safety or something. But of course, there's no guarantee. Also, something can go wrong or whatsoever. It's more like, I would say, like a certain common sense. Yeah, we need always in anything that we do. And we don't give this up when we use psychedelics. Yeah.
Where do you think does the most of resistance come from against the psychedelics? What's your take on that one?
I mean, I think it's pretty complex. I feel on the one hand, if I just use the examples of MDMA and psilocybin, which amazing research bodies, of groundbreaking results, nobody can throw this from the table. It's so strong results, yeah. And then, of course, all our medical systems of the pharma industry, etc. Let's say if we have a relatively quick results with amazing MDMA intervention or psychedelic psilocybin intervention, that would not mean that so many patients take lifelong antidepressants, etc., etc., etc. So it's definitely a question about money, pharma industry, etc., etc. That's one aspect. It's also, of course, one aspect, shadow aspect of our health system, of our medical treatment systems, to keep it in the hands of the medicine, yeah, to keep it there, to keep the patient, like dependent, not to empower the patient, keep to some extent keep the people small, yeah. That's one level, yeah, of resistance. The other resistance that I often see, really, especially also from professionals, you know, medical doctors, psychologists who are not yet educated, that everything, you know, there's too less education. We need more psychoeducation about psychedelics, the different substances, the different use, you know, like potential positive impact, different settings where it can be beneficial, how to have a safe setting, what is needed beyond the ceremony, because I mean, the ceremony is just a tip of the iceberg. The real work is before and after. How can we create safe spaces for that? So I feel there's a lack of education, and it's really a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of experience. I also always cite this example of sex. If you never had sex, how, I mean, you can discuss sex on a theoretical level, but if you, you know, you need the experience, and you need psychedelic experiences also in a safe setting, to probably, you know, like to learn further, which also can be, you know, like in the scientific field, it can be, for example, also a critical moment that many researchers, for example, might not have so much psychedelic experiences themselves, and might not even have the experience of psychedelic therapy. You know, so there are many angles why it is like with so much resistance. I would think also because it's so powerful and it's so dangerous. I mean, there are many contraindications, there are many risks. We really need to know what we do. We really need to know with whom we do it, in what setting, etc. So I always say it's like driving a Porsche. I mean, you need to be able to drive a Porsche, and still we don't know the real outcome, you know? So yeah, very good question.
I recall the Stanislav Grof sentence or expression that psychedelics are very, very big tool, powerful tool, but they are not the toys.
Yes. Yes. And also not alone. So I feel what kind of nowadays in this hype also now, and really kind of so just everybody wants to be then a psychedelic guide or whatsoever. It's a little bit over the top already. Yeah. It's not just the ceremony with the psychedelic. It's really the before and the after, and really the inner work, the self work, and learning integration skills, how to interweave the biographical patterns and also the cultural patterns with the experiences, and to really lead to transformation versus rather sitting in ceremonies again and again and again. And I feel that's really a shadow aspect and a danger nowadays, doing rather too much, too many ceremonies, rather taking too much substances then also, and not really doing the deeper inner work independent of a medicine or a substance.
You're planning a conference in Netherlands, which has a enticing title, Modern Eleusis. Can you what's cooking there, and can you share your ideas and plans on that one?
It's a symposium next year in June here in the Greater Amsterdam area, and it is exactly that what we all discussed today, to really bring together people from all directions, indigenous people, modern scientists, therapists, medical doctors, anthropologists, a specific focus on art, dance, music, a specific focus on nature, and really having this gathering together. And the first event is a symposium with work in nature, ceremonies in nature, talks, panels, gatherings, celebrations, preaching ancient wisdom and modern science. That's my motto. I feel that's what I'm really here for, to moderate, for the world. And so it's kind of a first event on behalf of an organization that I work for a long time. It's volunteer work. It's the European Transpersonal Association. I'm for more than 10 years a board member. And that's kind of my international standing in the transpersonal, let's say, transpersonal field. And I take it further, specifically in the psychedelic science field and bridging shamanism and modern science. And then the following, after the symposium, we will do a truffle ceremony, which is legal here in the Netherlands. The roots of the mushrooms are classified as food here in Netherlands and are legal. And our vision is to invite experts from all directions again, experts in as shamans, modern therapists and scientists sit together in the ceremony and work on all these existential questions and maybe have, you know, some new insights. And the goal is to then let this event travel every year to a different country with a different emphasis. So this year it will mean next year the first event will be, because we will use truffles, I invite specifically Mexican indigenous healers on mushroom cults. So that will be one emphasis. And then the vision is to let it travel further to different countries and different substances, and kind of create an international, I call it, multidisciplinary psychedelic council consisting exactly of that, indigenous shamans, modern scientists, artists, musicians, whatsoever, yeah, and to create really like not a new hub, but a hub to really concretely look with this emphasis. How can we look more in? How can we live more connected with nature? How can we focus on community building? How can we focus on really creating a new harmony, which I call the new Renaissance or the new Eleusis? And there's this beautiful video clip from Alex Gray. He produced some letter from Albert Hoffman shortly before his death, of Albert Hoffman, where he writes about it. We need a new Eleusis, and maybe, you know, like psychedelic substances can support that awakening to the bigger whole experience of life. And that's what he called a modern Eleusis. And I just really love this, how everything comes together, how Jung talked about it, how Albert Hoffman and many others talk about this. We need to come back to a bigger picture that is always there. All shamanic traditions are the wisdom keepers of that. And then we can say we need to move from I to we. I feel that will be the new Renaissance, that will be the new Eleusis, and that actually the wisdom keepers, the indigenous wisdom keepers, will lead the way, because they still have the knowledge of nature and community, living in the tribe.
I think we're approaching the end of the interview. But before I ask the last question, would Kaia like to?
I've got so much to rethink. Only one comment. It's when I read about your experience in tsunami, I just recalled that I was at the same time in Phuket.
Oh wow!
I somehow forgot it, but then I started to think. 2004, I saw this water going far, and then we just very quickly took a taxi and ran away, and I don't remember anything further what happened.
Yes.
It's a short remark.
Well, since the issue of art and poetry came up with in relation to this conference you're planning, I vividly remember you citing a poem by Rilke a few months ago, Ich lebe mein Leben in wachsenden Ringen. What's your take on this poem, and in particular, and on Rilke in general?
It describes my life, and I feel this describes all our lives to some extent, from that angle of having very existential, very challenging experiences, and at the same time experiencing oneness and a spiritual dimension that he would call God the tower, or, you know, like the messenger, the falcon. Yeah, I'm circling around the tower. That would be connecting also to all the shamanic traditions of everything is spirit, and just using the symbols. So Rilke just, he was I studied Rilke when I was, already in primary school. So it was this whole phase where all this spoke to me, this poetry, this European mysticism. I studied Hildegard von Bingen in primary school and Meister Eckhart. It just spoke so much, or I was studying the Psalms when my mother died. It kind of helped me in my grieving process. I was even suicidal at that time, yeah. And the Psalms between the lines and the words spoke so much to me that I could live and I could transform this suffering and this pain into a feeling of oneness, and I would say compassion and love. And I feel that's what Rilke kind of, I assume, experienced.
Dankeschön. Thank you so much for your time. And
so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.